folks. I'm here with astrologer Alexis Cox. She's presenting at the Next Generation of Vedic Astrology Conference with me, and she's going to be talking on walking your true path through the Lagna and Lagna Lord. And I'm just sitting down and having her, take us through, how she came up with this, how she's seen this in her practice, and what we can expect, what you can expect when she teaches this for us. So, Alexis, take it away.
Hi. Thank you. So this class, you can see, is about walking our true path through the Lagna and the Lagna Lord. And the way I came to this topic is because the most important question that my clients come to me again and again and again with, it really foundationally is, what am I doing here? Who am I and what am I doing here? People have different jobs, they have different careers, relationships, and things they relate themselves to. That they often identify themselves with, but they have a lot of trouble figuring out who they actually are in the sea of all the other things happening to them. So the most helpful tool I really use for my clients is just to identify for them who they are and literally what they're doing here on Earth. And so in this class, we're going to go through the different factors that really lay that out. And the first one, of course, is the ascendant. It's the Lagna, because this is where we come into the earth plane in form. So we're incarnating into a body, and that body has a personality, it has a modality, it has a way of operating. And this is key to understanding who we are. If you have, a Lagna that is Aries versus Taurus, you're going to have very different qualities to your personality and very different qualities to even your physical body and form. And so this is the first thing we really need to understand about ourselves. And a lot of times people sort of brush past the Lagna, or they brush past the ascendant. They don't really understand the depth that it shows to our identity. Or they often can even mistake it to be something egoic, something that's sort of superficial, as opposed to the truth of who we really are, who we actually are on this planet. So it's very important, especially in Vedic astrology. Probably, we focus on it more than, say, in Western astrology. So
that's so important what you just said, and a couple things that it's like that comparison between the first and the third house. The ascendant is our true identity. The third house is really that ego, our desires and whatnot. And that whole that whole concept is so important. So as it shows here that you're going to sort of contrast that with the other houses as well, and see how we tend to lose ourselves in these other roles. Everybody identifies with a certain role, and focusing on how we lose ourselves in that role is a lot of what you're going to be doing as well, correct?
Right, definitely, because and it really depends on each person's chart as to what roles they're getting lost in. Whether or not that is the career identity or
this is really me. This goes to work.
And we have a lot of things to confuse that. There's a lot of factors in the chart that do bring in some confusion for us. And for some people, they're not as confused because they have a lot of concentrated energy. So we're going to discuss that in detail in the class too, because that's a lot to take on in this moment. But there are a lot of factors that can come into play that really affect the way somebody experiences their identity. And one of the things, besides the fact that there's that sign that the Lagna is in, that really shows, even just the modality, the way of moving and all of things like that, we also sometimes have planets in the first house. So of course that totally affects somebody's personality a lot more than if it was just that clean rising sign with no other planets there. So we'll have examples of that in the class and things, because everybody's going to want to see the different variations of how this can really play out. So those planets in the first house are pretty important and pretty powerful too, and really affect how somebody even physically looks. If somebody has Jupiter in their first house, for example, even if they have an air sign or something that maybe lends towards being a little thinner, you see them sort of get rounder and gather more a little bit in their appearance.
Yeah, those planets in the first house are really tricky. When people ask someone to guess their ascendant, it's always one of those things. It's like, well, it's kind of hard because you might have Mars in the first, and I think you're an Aries, and you're actually a Cancer, because that first house planet is it's literally what's present.
Right. And especially if it's right on the rising sign, right? That's the most hard thing with, and Venus on the rising sign, and then, people have multiple planets, which really
Right.
starts to bring in, and you're one of those people. So you see that quality of a lot going on where you're meeting somebody and there's many layers to how they're presenting. And that's the experience of ourselves that other people also experience. So we have this tendency to really know ourselves from the inside out, like our moon. We feel the way we feel in every situation, and we don't always have that capacity to step back and see how we act, see what we're actually doing. But everybody else does, and so we are that personality that other people see. So again, somebody who has their moon on the rising might have a lot of connectivity with with their inner and outer self might be very congruent, whereas that might not be true for somebody who, say, has a Libra rising and an Aries moon, or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's there's a lot of factors involved in it, and we'll get into detail with all of them. And the other thing about the rising sign that's really important is, and I think this is actually the most overlooked thing by astrologers, of course not by you because you wrote a whole book on it, but the fact that each rising sign has houses set up from there. So every single person who, say, a Taurus rising has Leo as their fourth lord. That's huge. And it plays into even some of the stereotypes or things we might know about a Taurus, that quality of being a king in your home, and holding court in your home, and having that be a power point, and having that be a place of power, could be some of that quality of, say, stubbornness, or the strong personality that we see come out of a Taurus that isn't necessarily on the front end.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Where
That
when they
ascendant
wave the red
at that
flag
one point, it's that point in relation to every other one.
to all the other planets, and it's so important. It really shows everything from our relationships, our career, and how we understand our our purpose here.
Yeah.
And that's, and Taurus is actually a really good example for that reason, because, the ninth and 10th Lord are the same planet. And so there's a lot more congruence between what they believe, and that high teachings and the inspiration, the ideals, and what they're actually doing for a career. Whereas for other people, that could be very challenging to surmount. So there's, those things play into the rising sign very strong, and every single person with that rising sign is going to have those qualities, regardless of if they have
Yeah.
the planets in the first house, or all the other factors that come into play. That's going to be something they all share. So it is very important. And in Western astrology, obviously people are identified by their sun sign. That's what we see. And in Vedic astrology, traditionally it seems like a lot of people identify with the moon sign. And the problem with the rising sign is that it's hard. If you don't have your time of birth, it can be challenging to know it. But it's really worth getting rectified, or finding out what that is, because it is so much to do with what you're actually doing. When you read from the moon, it's more psychological. It's more that inner experience. And when you're reading from the rising sign, it's what's actually happening in your life. So not only are all these houses being set up, but they're also forming, yogas. And those are the things that show results in our life. So if you know which houses are structural and which houses are dharmic, it's going to make a big difference in seeing what actually transpires in your life, not what we want to happen, or what we, think should happen, or whatever, but what our parents want to happen to us. It's like, this is what's actually going on for us. And then again, if you have all those Tushrana houses or something else like that, it's good to know that you're constantly in that battle to deal with the difficult energy that's coming up for you. So
I notice you all, and obviously that's so right on. We lose ourselves in all these different roles and influences, and even if we just get a bunch of planets in the in the fourth house, then again we're going to put all this energy there, even though it might be something that's comforting. Again, what you're distinguishing here is our unique identity, our dharmic identity. Like you use Taurus with Leo in the fourth house as a certain quality of Taurus, but the person is still Taurus. That's still their nature. Even if they got 5 planets in Leo, now they're going to put all this energy in that, and they can lose themselves in that quality, because their unique identity is still revolves around those qualities of the ascendant. And that's the principle that you have here in the bottom here, this Lagna Lord, where is it, who's it with, and things like that, which really shows what you're going to explain here.
And I think to speak to what you just said, that's really one of the most important parts, is that people really do get lost from who they are, and they're not connected to it. And so when we can guide people there and say, hey, this is who you are and this is what you're trying to do, it really changes their perspective on everything else, and they can understand why. And I've had people say that too, who've maybe had extensive experience with Western astrology, and then they get a reading with me. They're like, no one's ever said it to me like that before. Like, maybe were told they were spacey or kind of out to lunch because they had a Pisces sun or whatever, but they were never explained, like, no, it's actually that your ruling planet is in the 12th house, and it's really very specific, and it helps people so much more to know exactly why, as opposed to this sort of nebulous notion of planets and signs, which can be very valuable, but this takes it to another level.
So again, we just have these few points here, but in the class that you're teaching, there's also going to be all kinds of other things that we also account for that you look at. But again, you have to teach these core fundamental principles first, and then everything is layered after that. And then you have to identify what the other things are. But again, it's hard to, but you can't teach every one of them because they're also anecdotal. Because now you have to look at it. Now you have to look at each individual chart to see those other things. But the main core aspects are this. And could you, explain a little bit more about where the Lagna Lord goes and who it's with, how that would work?
So the Lagna Lord is the planet that rules your sign. So if we go with the Taurus, then it's Venus. Whatever planet rules the sign, each planet rules two signs, is the Lord of two signs, and except for the sun and the moon. So wherever that planet goes in your chart is a house, and it's also a sign. So if you're a Taurus rising and it goes into your fourth house of Leo, you then have a path in life that has to do with finding peace in your heart. And it's going to show up in the many different ways that the fourth house can manifest itself, through the home, maybe wanting to be home a lot, wanting to have a house, having a lot of energy in that area of your life. But it's really, if you, like Sam was talking about, if you have sort of this stellium of planets somewhere totally else, like across the way from it, you can feel very distracted by that energy without realizing that what you're ultimately trying to do is find peace in your heart. So when we understand where our ruling planet goes, we really get a taste of what we're trying to make every experience be like, even if all this energy is everywhere else. And the other, big factor besides the stellium of planets is really Rahu and Ketu, the nodes, and how much energy they pull us to, especially Rahu. It can work with it or against wherever your ruling planet is. So of course that also brings into play who is joined, who it's with, as I put.
Right.
Because if there are planets joined your ruling planet, that's going to greatly color that experience as well.
So all of these are those extemporaneous ancillary principles, that all these possibilities. This is why when people even when people ask astrologers, well, what if this? Well, what if that? There's an endless what ifs. There's always the what ifs, but it doesn't take you away from the core essence of the principles that you're dealing with. This is why what Alexis is doing is great, because she's taking those, 3 or 4, 5 most important core principles, going deeply into them so you really understand that everything else is then conditioning these core principles. And we're going to talk, and she'll also talk about those other situations, like, of course, where the nodal axis is, if there's a stellium here, if there's this or that, being able to see where a person can tend to lose themselves, but really be able to dial in what that core essence is. It's going to be a great class. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you. And I think that fundamental quality where we're really starting from the base and building on it is really what I love about this particular topic, because it is, if you don't know who you are and what you're doing, then everything else is kind of can become a distraction.
Then you're just lost in that, and you're lost in it's usually with other people. And again, it's the interpretations of other people. Maybe it's what your boss said, if you have planets in the 10th house, trying to please the boss. Maybe it's your partners if it's in the 7th house. Maybe it's your siblings if it's the 3rd house, your father. Again, often it shows up as other people, but it's still kind of losing our core essence in what other people say or other roles that we have to play.
Right. And we might be really good at some of those other things. So
Oh,
that
we often are, because we're putting
we
a lot
have
of attention on it.
right. Well, we have a tendency in our society, especially if you're good at something, then that's sort of fed to you your whole life is like, this is what you're doing. And then at some point you wake up and you're like, what am I doing? This doesn't even, it doesn't make sense anymore. So if you can really understand what you really want to be doing, what's really like what you're physically drawn to in each thing you do, then you're tapping into the heart of it, as opposed to just this sort of general job you have or this general thing, you're why are you doing that? Why are you an artist, or why are you whatever? What is the part that you connect to?
Right. That
Really,
identity that's beyond the roles that we're playing. And
right.
the feedback loop that we get, because we got a lot of planets there. So we do a lot of it and we get affirmation. And so it reaffirms it. And again, it's like a feedback loop, and we're forgetting the essence underneath it all, which is what you're going to show us how to do.
Yeah. So I'm very
Great.
excited.
You know what? This is fantastic. And we could keep talking. I'm trying to keep these to about 15 minutes or so. It's such a big topic, just to give people an idea. So this was great, Alexis. And I really thank you for your participation in the conference. And this class is going to be great. And we look forward to seeing you all on that class.
All right. We'll see you then. Namaste.